My name is Maroney, and I am 35 years old. I'm a mother of two kids who still believe the world is mostly fair if you work hard and tell the truth. Emma is 11, sharp as a tack, the kind of child who notices everything and pretends she doesn't. David is 9, sweet, sensitive, still young enough to think adults always mean what they say. I used to believe that too, at least when it came to my own parents. Not anymore. Let me start from the beginning, because if I don't, what happened next sounds too outrageous to be real. I grew up in suburban Ohio in what looked like a normal middle-class family. My parents, Robert and Linda, owned a successful accounting firm. We lived comfortably. The grass was always cut. The Christmas cards always looked perfect. We had the kind of life that made people assume nothing bad happened behind closed doors. But inside our house, there were two versions of childhood. One for me and one for my sister Jessica. Jessica is 3 years younger than me, and from the day she was born, it was like the sun shifted in the sky. Suddenly, everything revolved around her moods, her needs, her potential. When I got a B, I was asked what happened. When Jessica got a C, it was celebrated as improvement. I was expected to excel, help with chores, be responsible, be grateful. Jessica was expected to be herself, which somehow meant everyone else made life easier for her. I carried that dynamic into adulthood like it was just how families worked. I worked 2 jobs through college, graduated with honors, built a real career. I landed a marketing director position at a mid-sized company and learned how to juggle deadlines, budgets, meetings, and the quiet pressure of always being the dependable one. I met my husband Mike when I was 26. He's a high school teacher, the kind of man who actually listens when you talk, who shows up when things are hard, who doesn't treat kindness like currency. We got married 2 years later. We bought a modest 3-bedroom house in a decent neighborhood. We weren't wealthy, but we were stable. Our kids were happy. They had friends. They felt safe. That mattered to me more than anything my parents would call impressive. Jessica's life went the opposite direction, and my parents treated it like a creative phase she was entitled to. She dropped out of college after 2 years to find herself. She bounced from job to job, relationship to relationship, always landing back in my parents' arms financially. When she was 28, she married Brad, a sales guy with a gambling problem that everyone pretended was just bad luck. My parents ignored it, because ignoring things is their favorite way of keeping the story clean. As a wedding gift, they bought Jessica and Brad a beautiful 4-bedroom house in an upscale neighborhood called Maple Ridge, $425,000. A house with a big kitchen and a fenced yard and all the little details that scream we made it. Something they never even discussed doing for Mike and me. Not once. When I quietly asked how they could afford it, my mother smiled and said, "Jessica just needs a little help getting started." I didn't argue. I swallowed it like I always had. Then last spring, Jessica announced she was pregnant with her first child, and you would have thought she'd discovered the cure for cancer by the way my parents reacted. My mother cried. My father started talking about legacy. They talked about that baby like it was the first grandchild on earth, like Emma and David didn't already exist, like my children didn't already call them Grandpa and Grandma. Around the same time, Mike's father was dying of cancer. Mike took unpaid leave to help his mom, and our finances got tight. Not reckless, not irresponsible, just tight. The kind of tight where you're choosing which bill gets paid first and hoping the next paycheck lands before the mortgage comes due. I swallowed my pride and mentioned it to my parents one evening on the phone, not asking them to solve it, just saying we were struggling. My mother's response was calm and cold. "Well, Maroney, you made your choices. You chose to have children young, and now you need to figure it out." I remember sitting there with the phone pressed to my ear, feeling heat rise in my face. My kids were not a mistake. My life was not a consequence, but that's how she said it. Like responsibility was something I deserved, and Jessica didn't. And then came the Saturday in June that changed everything. My parents invited Mike and me over for dinner. Jessica and Brad were there too. Jessica was showing off her belly like it was a trophy, laughing loudly, soaking up attention. Brad smirked through most of the meal, the kind of man who looks like he's always calculating what he can get away with. Mike barely spoke. He'd been exhausted, grief still sitting heavy on him, and he was too polite to show how uncomfortable he felt. After dinner, my father cleared his throat and said he had some family business to discuss. That phrase alone made my stomach tighten. In our family, family business never meant anything good. It meant they'd decided something and wanted me to cooperate. "Your mother and I have been thinking," he began, and I watched Jessica sit up straighter like she already knew the punchline. "We've decided Jessica and Brad need a bigger house for the baby. We found a beautiful 6-bedroom home in Westfield Estates, and we've already put in an offer." I congratulated Jessica because that's what you do when you're trained to clap, while someone else gets everything. Inside, I felt that familiar sting, jealousy mixed with something darker. Mike and I were fighting to keep our first house. They were buying her a second one. Then my father reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "Now, Maroney," he said, and the way he said my name made it feel like a warning. "We need to talk to you about something important. We need you to sign some documents related to the mortgage." I stared at the papers like they were written in a different language. Why would I need to sign anything for Jessica's house? My mother spoke slowly, like she was explaining something obvious to a child. "We had to put your name on the mortgage application for financial reasons. You have better credit than Jessica, and the bank required a cosigner." My brain stalled. "You put my name on it already." My father nodded like that was the most normal thing in the world. "The mortgage is $650,000. We just need you to sign as the primary borrower. But like your mother said, we'll take care of everything. We'll make the payments." The room spun around me. My throat went tight. "You want me to be legally responsible for a $650,000 mortgage?" Jessica leaned back in her chair with the most smug expression I have ever seen. "Maroney, don't be so dramatic. Mom and Dad said they'll make the payments. You're just signing papers." Just signing papers. Like my life and my children's future were a formality. I turned to my parents, waiting for one of them to say something that sounded like love. "What about my children? What about Emma and David? What happens to us if you can't make the payments?" My father's face hardened, the kindness evaporating. "Nothing will go wrong. Jessica comes first right now. Emma and David can grow up and buy their own houses someday. Jessica is having our first grandchild, and she deserves the best." My stomach dropped. "Emma and David are your grandchildren too," I said, and my voice shook despite how hard I tried to steady it. My mother waved her hand dismissively. "Some children are just more important than others, Maroney. Jessica's baby will be special. Our first real grandchild from our successful daughter." I felt Mike tense beside me, his face pale, eyes flicking between them, like he couldn't believe people could say those words out loud. Brad smirked, enjoying every second. Then Jessica looked right at me and delivered a line that still makes my blood burn. "Real mothers deserve real homes, Maroney. Maybe if you were a better mother, you'd understand I need this more than you do." Something in me snapped, not into screaming, into clarity. I stood up. "No," I said, and my voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Absolutely not. I will not sign those papers. I will not put my family at risk for Jessica's mansion. This is insane." My father slammed his hand on the table. "You ungrateful—" "What have you done for me?" I shot back, and the words came out like they'd been waiting years. "You paid for Jessica's college after she dropped out. You bought her a house. You gave her everything while I worked my ass off for scraps." My mother's eyes went sharp. "Get out," she hissed. "Get out of our house and don't come back until you come to your senses." Mike and I left that night with our hearts pounding and our hands shaking. I thought refusing to sign meant it was over. I was naive. Because as we drove home, my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica, a photo of the papers spread out on the table, and 2 words underneath. "You'll sign." The first thing I noticed after that night was how quiet my parents became. Not the normal kind of quiet where people cool off and regroup, but the strategic kind. The kind that feels like something is happening just out of sight. No calls, no texts, no angry follow-ups. Just silence that stretched for days, then weeks. Jessica didn't stay silent. She started small, the way she always did. A picture of a nursery crib she accidentally sent to the family group chat. A screenshot of a mortgage calculator with a caption that read, "Trying to budget for baby stuff is stressful." Every message was designed to make me feel like the villain without saying my name. Then the guilt messages came directly. "You know Brad's commissions have been slow. Mom's been so anxious about the baby. Families help each other, Maroney. I thought you understood that." I blocked her for 2 days just to breathe. When I unblocked her, there were 14 new messages waiting. Mike watched me read them at the kitchen table one night while Emma and David were doing homework in the living room. He didn't interrupt. He just put his hand over mine and said quietly, "Whatever they're trying to do, it's not normal." I wanted to believe him, but part of me still clung to the idea that my parents would back down, that they'd realize how extreme it was to ask me to risk my kids' future for Jessica's second house, that they'd choose fairness for once. They didn't. Instead, my father called one evening and spoke like nothing had happened, asked about work, asked about the kids, asked if Mike's mother was doing better. Then, casually, like he was asking me to pass the salt, he said, "Have you had a chance to look over the mortgage documents yet?" My stomach dropped. "I told you I'm not signing anything," I said. There was a pause, then his voice hardened. "We already discussed this. This isn't optional." "It absolutely is," I replied. "I never agreed to this." "You did," he said calmly. "You just don't remember it that way." That sentence haunted me. Over the next week, the calls increased. My mother cried. My father threatened. Jessica sent pictures of her belly with captions like, "Doing everything I can for my baby." Brad sent one message, just one, that said, "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Mike started sleeping badly. I caught him staring at the ceiling some nights, jaw tight. One morning, he admitted he'd been running numbers in his head, trying to figure out how we'd survive if somehow the mortgage landed on us. That was when the fear truly set in. 2 months after that dinner, a white envelope arrived in the mail, a law firm letterhead. I stood in the entryway holding it, my hands shaking so badly I had to sit down on the stairs to open it. The words blurred together at first, then snapped into focus. My parents were suing me for $650,000. They claimed I had verbally agreed to take responsibility for the mortgage and was now breaching that agreement. The letter stated the house had already been purchased with me listed as the primary borrower and that I was legally responsible for the debt. I felt sick. I called my parents immediately. No answer. Jessica answered on the third ring, her voice calm, almost cheerful. "You got the letter, huh?" "What did you do?" I whispered. She sighed like I was exhausting her. "We did what we had to do. You left us no choice." I hung up and called the first lawyer I could find. Her name was Patricia Hernandez, and she specialized in family financial disputes. She listened without interrupting while I explained everything, my voice cracking halfway through. When I finished, there was a long pause. "Maroney," she said carefully, "I need you to answer one question honestly. Did you sign anything at all? Anything recently? Even something that seemed unrelated?" I closed my eyes. Last Christmas flashed through my mind. My dad sitting at the dining table with a stack of papers, saying it was routine, saying it was just updating beneficiaries and emergency contacts, saying he didn't want to bother me with details during the holidays. "I signed something," I said slowly, "but I didn't read it. I trusted him." Patricia exhaled. "We need copies of everything you signed, because if what you're describing is accurate, this isn't a family disagreement." "What is it?" I asked. This sounds like fraud." The word landed heavy in my chest. As I hung up, my phone buzzed again. A new message from my father. "Don't make this ugly. Just do the right thing." I looked at Mike, at my children laughing in the next room, and felt something shift inside me. They weren't asking anymore. They were forcing me. Patricia didn't waste time. By the next morning, she had me emailing, scanning, digging through old files like I was searching for proof of my own innocence, bank statements, tax returns, anything my parents had ever asked me to sign. I pulled boxes out of closets, flipped through folders I hadn't opened in years, my stomach tightening with every page that had my name on it. Mike sat with me on the floor, quietly sorting, keeping Emma and David distracted with a movie in the other room. Every few minutes he'd ask if I was okay. I kept saying yes, even though my hands were trembling. It took hours before I found it. A thin holiday folder tucked inside a box labeled Christmas 2022. Inside were printed emails, gift receipts, and at the bottom, a copy of a document with my signature at the end. I recognized the paper instantly. My father had slid it across the table after dinner, smiling, telling me it was just routine paperwork. Beneficiaries, emergency contacts, family financial updates. I'd been tired, distracted, trusting. I hadn't read past the first page. Patricia's office went silent when I brought the copies in that afternoon. She read everything slowly, methodically, a pen tapping against the desk like a countdown. Her jaw tightened the longer she read. "This," she said finally, turning the document toward me, "is not routine." She pointed to a paragraph buried in the middle, legal language dense enough to make my eyes glaze over. It authorized me as a co-signer on future real estate purchases made by my parents for the benefit of the family. Another clause granted limited power of attorney for financial transactions under specific conditions. My name, my signature. Clean, deliberate. "They used this," Patricia continued, "to apply for the mortgage in your name." I felt cold all over. "They also used your identification information," she said. "Social security number, copies of your ID, employment verification letters." What? I whispered. Forged, she said flatly. They inflated your salary, claimed you earned nearly double what you actually do. That's how they got the loan approved. I stared at her, my ears ringing. But I never signed the mortgage. You didn't have to, Patricia replied. They signed it for you. Then she said something that made my chest tighten so hard I had to grip the arm of the chair. There's more. She pulled another file from her stack. The Maple Ridge house, the one they bought for Jessica as a wedding gift. That mortgage is also in your name. I shook my head. That's impossible. Patricia slid the papers toward me. It's not. You've been legally responsible for that house for 3 years. They've been making the payments, but the debt has always been yours. My vision blurred. $425,000 plus $650,000. Over $1 million in debt attached to my name without my knowledge, without my consent, without a single conversation. They've been using you, Patricia said quietly. And not just recently. I left her office in a daze, drove home on autopilot, and sat in my car for 10 minutes before I could move. When I finally walked inside, Mike took one look at my face and pulled me into his arms. I didn't cry right away. I just stood there, shaking, trying to wrap my mind around the fact that my parents had been quietly dismantling my life while smiling at me across dinner tables. That night, Jessica texted again. Don't panic. Mom and Dad said it'll all work out once you stop being difficult. I didn't respond. 2 days later, Patricia called me early in the morning. Her voice was sharper than before. Maroney, she said, we just got something unexpected. What? I asked, bracing myself. Brad's mistress contacted my office. I almost dropped the phone. She has recordings, Patricia continued. Audio. Conversations between Brad and someone else where he talks about your parents' plan, about sticking you with the mortgage, about how Jessica knew. My knees went weak. She says Brad confided in her because he was panicking, Patricia said. She recorded everything, and now she wants revenge. I closed my eyes, feeling something dark and heavy settle in my chest. For the first time since this began, it wasn't just my word against theirs. They'd been caught. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's smile across that Christmas table, the way he'd slid the papers toward me like they were nothing. I heard my mother's voice telling me not to worry, that family paperwork was boring, and I didn't need to read it. I remembered Jessica's smug confidence, the way she'd leaned back in her chair at dinner, like she already knew how everything would end. By morning, my phone was buzzing nonstop. My parents, Jessica, Brad. I didn't answer a single one. Patricia had me in her office before noon. She looked different now, sharper, energized in a way that told me this case had crossed from messy family drama into something far more serious. The recordings are real, she said, setting a small digital recorder on the desk. We've verified them. Dates, voices, context. They're solid. She pressed play. Brad's voice filled the room, casual and laughing, like he was telling a joke to a friend. Yeah, Maroney's credit is perfect. That's the whole point. Robert and Linda figured if they saddle her with the debt, she'll panic but still pay. She's always been the responsible one. My stomach twisted. Another clip played. Jessica's voice this time, lighter, amused. She'll freak out, but what's she gonna do? She has kids. She can't afford a legal fight. Mom says we just need to push harder. I felt like I was watching my childhood collapse in real time. Patricia let the recordings run longer than I wanted to hear. Conversations about forging documents, about moving money around, about how my parents' business was bleeding cash and how this was the solution, how sticking me with the mortgage solved 2 problems at once. When it finally stopped, the room felt suffocatingly quiet. They planned this, I whispered. Yes, Patricia said. For months, possibly longer. She slid a legal pad toward me. Here's what we're going to do. We're filing countersuits for fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and financial abuse. We're also reporting your parents to the State Board of Accountancy. They use their professional status to commit this. I thought of Emma and David, their rooms, their school, their sense of safety. Do it, I said, all of it. The fallout was immediate. By the end of the week, my parents' lawyer was calling Patricia demanding mediation. Jessica left me a voicemail crying, telling me she was pregnant and scared and how could I do this to family. Brad sent a message from a number I didn't recognize telling me I was overreacting and that this would ruin everyone's lives. I blocked them all. The lawsuit filings went public. That's when the tone changed. Neighbors stopped waving at my parents' office. Clients began quietly pulling accounts. Whispers started circulating about irregularities, about documents that didn't quite add up. The accounting firm my parents built their reputation on began to crumble under scrutiny. Jessica showed up at my house once, unannounced, holding her belly like a shield. Please, she said through the door. Just talk to me. I didn't open it. This isn't what it looks like, she cried. Mom and Dad handled everything. I didn't know all the details. I pressed my forehead against the door, heart pounding. You laughed about it, I said. We have the recordings. Silence. Then her voice dropped, cold and bitter. You're really going to destroy us. No, I replied. You did that yourselves. The trial date was set 3 months later. That's when Patricia delivered the final blow I wasn't expecting. There's a good chance they'll try to use the baby in court, she said. Sympathy strategy. Expect Jessica to bring the child once it's born. I nodded slowly. If they thought guilt would save them, they were about to learn how wrong they were. Walking into the courtroom felt nothing like justice. It felt like stepping into a funeral where the body hadn't been acknowledged yet. 14 months had passed since that dinner. 14 months of depositions, forensic audits, subpoenas, and sleepless nights. By the time the trial began, the shock had burned off, leaving behind something harder and steadier. Resolve. My parents sat at the defense table like they still belonged there. Suits pressed, hair done. The same carefully curated image they'd used my entire life. Jessica sat between them, 4 months postpartum, cradling her baby like armor. She made sure everyone saw him, every juror, every court officer, every witness. Mike squeezed my hand when we took our seats. I didn't squeeze back. I needed both hands grounded on the table. Patricia didn't waste time. She opened with facts. Clean, unemotional, devastating. Mortgage documents, forged employment letters, identity verification records, power of attorney clauses buried in family paperwork. The jury leaned forward before she even reached the recordings. When Brad's voice filled the courtroom, something shifted. You could feel it. The casual cruelty in his tone. The laughter when he referred to me as the responsible one who will figure it out. Jessica's recorded voice followed, joking about how I wouldn't fight back because I had kids and couldn't afford to. I didn't look at her. I watched the jurors' faces instead. One woman pressed her lips together so tightly they went white. Another shook his head slowly, like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Witness after witness followed. Former clients of my parents described eerily similar financial planning suggestions. A neighbor testified about years of favoritism. A fraud examiner laid out the money trail like a map of intent, showing how my parents' business was bleeding cash and how shifting debt to me was their escape hatch. Then came the line that ended any illusion of innocence. My mother's voice played through the courtroom speakers. Sarah's always been the responsible one. She'll figure out how to pay. And if she doesn't, we'll just take her house too. Jessica sobbed when it played. No one moved to comfort her. When Patricia cross-examined Jessica, it was over. Jessica admitted she knew. Admitted she went along with it. Tried to frame it as fear, pregnancy, pressure. The jury didn't buy it. Neither did I. The verdict came 3 weeks later. Guilty. Fraud, conspiracy, identity theft. The damages totaled more than I could process in the moment. Enough to erase the fraudulent debt. Enough to cover emotional harm. Enough to ensure my children would never pay for my parents' greed. But the real collapse happened outside the courtroom. Within days, the state board revoked my parents' accounting licenses. Their firm folded. Bankruptcy followed. The house they lived in was seized. Jessica and Brad divorced before the baby was 6 months old. The affair recordings destroyed whatever illusion of loyalty remained. I didn't celebrate. I exhaled. Because what I'd been fighting for wasn't money. It was proof. Proof that I wasn't imagining the favoritism. Proof that I wasn't too sensitive. Proof that what they did wasn't a misunderstanding or a family disagreement. It was abuse dressed up as love. And for the first time in my life, the truth was louder than their version of it. The verdict didn't bring relief the way people think it does. It brought silence first. The kind that rings in your ears because there's nothing left to argue about. No appeals to make. No narratives to spin. Just consequences settling where they were always meant to land. The money arrived in stages, not all at once. Court-ordered restitution. Damages, penalties, numbers I read 3 times because my brain refused to accept them. Enough to erase every mortgage tied to my name. Enough to pay off our house in full. Enough to set college funds for Emma and David that no one could ever touch again. Mike cried when we signed the final payoff papers. He didn't try to hide it. He said he hadn't realized how heavy the fear had been until it was gone. I felt it too. Like a constant low hum in my chest finally switched off. My parents didn't call. They didn't text. They didn't show up. Their lawyer sent a single, stiff letter acknowledging the judgment and outlining payment logistics. No apology, no acknowledgement of harm, just logistics. That told me everything I needed to know. The community noticed the collapse faster than I expected. The accounting firm shuttered. The sign came down. People whispered in grocery aisles. The local paper ran a follow-up piece when the licenses were revoked. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. Facts did the work. Jessica tried once. She showed up at my house on a gray afternoon, holding her baby like a peace offering. She stood on the porch, shoulders slumped, eyes red. She looked smaller than I remembered, not because she'd changed, but because the power she was used to standing on was gone. "Maroney," she said softly, "I know things got out of hand." Out of hand. I didn't open the door. "I hope you raise him better than you were raised," I said through the glass, "but I can't have you in my life." She pressed her forehead to the door for a moment, then turned and left. I felt sad for the child. I felt nothing for her. A month later, a woman named Maria contacted Patricia. She'd been my grandmother's housekeeper for years. She said she had something important to share. We met in a small cafe, and she slid documents across the table that made my stomach drop. My grandmother had changed her will. She'd left equal inheritances to Jessica and me, $85,000 each. She'd worried my parents would favor Jessica and wanted to make sure I was taken care of. My parents were named executors. They never told me. They told me the money went to Jessica because she needed it more. Another court, another filing, another judgment, another truth exposed. The pattern became undeniable. Not favoritism, exploitation. The final twist came when a tabloid reached out. Jessica had tried to sell her story. She painted herself as a victim of family drama, claimed I stole her future. The magazine fact-checked. They pulled transcripts. They ran the recordings. The headline wasn't what she expected. She never contacted me again. 3 years later, life is quieter than it's ever been. Emma is 14 now, confident, opinionated, unafraid to ask hard questions. David is 12, artistic, sensitive, still gentle in a world that tries to harden boys early. They know the outline of what happened. They know that sometimes adults do bad things, and sometimes loving someone means saying no. Mike and I celebrated our 10th anniversary last month. We didn't throw a party. We cooked dinner at home and sat on the back porch until it got cold. He told me he was proud of me. I told him I couldn't have done it without him. Both were true. I started my own consulting firm. I built it slowly, deliberately, with systems designed around transparency and consent. No surprises, no buried clauses, no power plays disguised as help. When my employees tell me it's the healthiest place they've ever worked, I believe them. Sometimes I still wonder what would have happened if I'd signed those papers, if I'd swallowed my fear and trusted the lie. I know the answer. We would have lost everything. Standing up to my family didn't break me. It freed me. 3 years after the verdict, a letter showed up in my mailbox. No return address at first glance, just my name written carefully, like someone had practiced it. I stood at the kitchen counter for a long time before opening it, Emma doing homework nearby, David sketching at the table. I didn't want my reaction to spill into their afternoon. It was from my mother. She wrote about starting over, about working as a bookkeeper for a small company in another state, about living in a modest apartment with my father, and how difficult it was to rebuild in their late 60s. She wrote about regret in the abstract, the way people do when they're still protecting themselves from the full weight of what they've done. Then came the line that made my chest tighten. I know you may never forgive us, but losing you and the kids has been the hardest consequence of our actions. I read it twice, 3 times. It wasn't an apology, not really. It was grief mixed with justification, wrapped in the hope that time alone could smooth everything over. She asked for another chance. She asked me to consider the years ahead, the holidays, the possibility that my children might grow up without grandparents. I folded the letter and set it aside. That night, after the kids were asleep, Mike asked if I was okay. I handed him the letter. He read it quietly, then looked at me and waited. He never told me what to do. He never has. I thought about Emma and David, about the night I'd sat on the floor explaining why we wouldn't see Grandma and Grandpa anymore, about how I'd told them that sometimes loving yourself means choosing distance, even when it hurts. I thought about the words my mother used at that dinner years ago. Some children are just more important than others. I didn't respond to the letter, not out of spite, out of clarity. A few months later, Jessica tried again. It was her son's birthday. She sent a message that read like a test balloon. Family is family. Don't you think it's time to move past this for the sake of the children? No acknowledgement of fraud, no ownership, just pressure dressed up as concern. I blocked the number. I learned something in those years that therapy helped me name. My family had trained me to confuse endurance with love, to believe that being useful was the same as being valued. Every attempt at reconciliation came with an unspoken condition that I accept their version of events and minimize my own reality to make them comfortable. I wasn't willing to do that anymore. Life filled in around the absence. We built traditions that didn't involve tension or comparison. Mike's parents became steady, uncomplicated grandparents to Emma and David. My Aunt Carol stepped into a role that felt natural, showing up without expectations or strings. Friends became chosen family in ways that felt earned, not obligatory. Sometimes people asked if I missed my parents, if I missed my sister, especially around holidays. The truth is complicated. I miss the idea of them. I miss the parents I thought I had, the sister I hoped would someday grow up and meet me halfway. I don't miss the reality. I don't miss being measured against someone else's needs or treated like a resource instead of a person. The house in Westfield Estates eventually sold at a loss. New owners moved in, unaware of the damage that had been baked into its walls before they ever hung a picture. I drove past it once, by accident. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt relieved. That house was supposed to be my prison. It became the reason I walked free. I used to think closure would feel loud. I imagined some final confrontation, a dramatic apology, a moment where everyone finally admitted what they'd done and I got to decide whether to forgive them. That's how stories usually end, with speeches and tears and a sense of resolution that feels earned. That's not how this ended. It ended quietly, the way real things do when you stop forcing them to be something they're not. Life kept moving. Emma started high school and discovered she loved math more than anything else. She stayed up late solving problems for fun, arguing with me about equations like it was a sport. David found art. Not doodling, but real art. Charcoal, paint, sketchbooks he guarded like treasure. Watching them grow without fear, without instability, without adults treating them like leverage, felt like the greatest victory I could have imagined. Mike and I settled into something solid and calm. The legal battle didn't break us. It clarified us. We learned how to stand shoulder to shoulder instead of back to back, how to talk through fear without turning it into blame. When people asked how we survived it, Mike always said the same thing. We told the truth to each other, even when it was uncomfortable. That mattered more than money ever did. My consulting business grew faster than I expected. Word spread. Clients liked that I didn't play games, that contracts were clean, that nothing was hidden in fine print. I built the company the opposite of how my parents ran theirs. No power tricks, no leverage disguised as help. Transparency wasn't just a policy, it was personal. Every once in a while, someone new would Google my name and find the old articles, the fraud case, the trial, the family implosion. I stopped trying to explain it away. I told the truth. Some people flinched. Others nodded like they recognized something familiar. More than a few pulled me aside later and said, "That happened to me too, just smaller." That's how the support group started. Not formal, not advertised. Just people who'd been financially or emotionally used by family and needed to know they weren't crazy. I never heard from my parents again after the letter. No follow-up, no apology that stood on its own without excuses, no effort to acknowledge the damage beyond how it affected them. I don't know if they tell people I abandoned them, or if they've rewritten the story to make it easier to live with. I don't need to know. Jessica faded from my life in pieces, a blocked number here, a mutual friend there who quietly stopped mentioning her. The last I heard, she was working retail, living paycheck to paycheck, still struggling to accept that consequences aren't persecution. I feel sadness for her child. I feel none for her choices. Sometimes I catch myself wondering who I would have been if I'd grown up without favoritism hanging over my head like a shadow, if I'd been allowed to fail without punishment or succeed without guilt. Then I stop, because that version of me doesn't exist. The woman I am now does, and she knows how to say no. I drive past the old neighborhood sometimes, past the accounting firm that no longer has a sign, past the schools we never sent our kids to, past the house that started it all. I don't slow down. I don't look back. The hardest part of all of this wasn't the trial or the money or even the betrayal. It was accepting that love, when it's real, doesn't require you to disappear. I didn't lose my family when I refused to sign those papers. I found myself.